March 15, 1943. 11,000 feet over the shark-toothed jungles of New Guinea. The sun was a white, punishing hammer on the canopy of the worn-out P-40 Warhawk. Inside the cockpit, the air was thick, smelling of sweat, stale oil, and old metal. John Worthington's hands, wrinkled and speckled with age, rested on the stick with a calm that bordered on disinterest. At 48 years old, he was a relic in a pilot's war. His hair was gray. His eyes, behind his scratched goggles, had seen decades of peaceful skies as an airline captain for TWA. They called him Grandpa, and today, they'd given him a flying coffin to deliver. This P-40 wasn't a warbird, it was a veteran stripped of pride. Its olive drab paint was blistered and faded, its Allison engine coughed on the lean mixture, and it flew with a slight, stubborn list to the left. Worthington wasn't headed for a dogfight. He was a ferry pilot, a glorid truck driver of the air, tasked with moving this tired machine from one battered airstrip to another, well behind the supposed front lines. It was a duty born of necessity and, perhaps, a quiet insult. The young hotshots in their shiny new lightnings and thunderbolts would nod respectfully, but their eyes said it all. You're from a different time. This isn't your war. Worthington didn't mind. The hum of an engine, any engine, was a familiar song. He scanned the endless, hostile green below, a carpet of hidden Japanese airfields and anti-aircraft positions. His map was folded on his knee, the course penciled in. He was to follow the coastline, a boring, milk-run delivery. No heroics. Just get the old girl home. Then, a flicker in the corner of his eye. A speck. Then another. A smattering of dark grains against the deep blue, far off his right wing, materializing out of the heat haze over the Solomon Sea. He squinted, his pilot's instinct tensing a muscle he thought he'd retired. They were moving fast, in a loose, predatory formation. The profile was unmistakable, the sleek, rounded wings, the long greenhouse canopy. A formation of Japanese A-6M0 fighters, at least a dozen of them, heading on an intercept course that would cut right across his path. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. This wasn't part of the delivery briefing. He was alone. He was in a slow, poorly armed, battered plane that handled like a truck compared to the agile Zeros. And he was old. The Zero Squadron leader had seen him. The formation banked as one, a shimmering, deadly wheel turning in the sun, their wingtips catching the light. They weren't attacking yet. They were assessing. To them, he was alone, slow-moving target of opportunity. An easy kill to pad a score. You can imagine the radio chatter in those Zeros, the young Imperial Navy pilots grinning behind their oxygen masks, pointing at the solitary, obsolete American plane. In his cockpit, the world shrank to the deafening roar of his own struggling engine, the frantic needle of the fuel gauge, and those growing shapes. The war he had been skirting had just found him. He had two choices: dive for the jungle and try to vanish in the treetops, or run and be chased down like a rabbit. Both were death sentences. His mind, a mind trained for navigating transcontinental passenger routes and bad weather, not dogfights, began to work. Not with a fighter pilot's reflexes, but with a seasoned captain's calculated gamble. He looked at his radio. It was his only weapon. His hand reached for the microphone, his thumb pressing the transmit button. He took a slow breath, pushing the fear down into a cold, solid weight. He had to sell a lie so big it could scare off a wolf pack. He switched his radio to the common Allied air-to-air frequency, a channel the Japanese listened to intently. And then, in a voice deliberately calm, devoid of the panic clawing at his ribs, John Grandpa Worthington began to speak. His voice crackled over the open frequency, a studied, bored drawl that belied the adrenaline screaming through his veins. Eagle leader to Eagle flight. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Confirm visual. Form up on me and prepare to engage. He released the button. Silence. The Zeros were closer now, their distinctive silhouettes hardening. He could almost feel the curiosity radiating from their cockpits. Who was this lone pilot talking to? He keyed the mic again, this time with a hint of crisp authority, the kind used by a squadron commander. Eagle 2, take your element wide right. Eagle 3, stack high. Let's keep it clean, gentlemen. Don't get greedy. Each word was a bullet fired into the void. He was painting a picture in empty air, conducting an orchestra of ghosts. He gave coordinates, a patch of sky just north of his own position, and altitudes, creating a three-dimensional chessboard of an impending battle that existed only in his mind, and he prayed, in the ears of the Japanese pilots listening in. In the lead zero, the commander's eyes would have darted from his lone target to the empty sky around it. The Americans' transmissions were too calm, too specific. This wasn't the panicked mayday of a cornered man. This was the cool, tactical chatter of a hunter setting a trap. Where were the other Americans? In the sun? Hidden in a cloud bank? The P-40 was old, but what if it was bait? Worthington watched them. He didn't jerk his plane into an evasive maneuver. Instead, he began a slow, deliberate climb toward the coordinates he had just invented, as if joining his imagined formation. The worn P-40 groaned in protest, its engine temperature creeping into the red. Every second stretched into an eternity. The fabric of his flight suit stuck to his back with cold sweat. He transmitted once more, his tone shifting to one of slight annoyance. "Eagle 2, mind your spacing. We do this by the book. Wait for my mark." It was a masterstroke. The faux pas of a subordinate pilot, the mild chastisement of a leader. It was all too human, too authentic. It sold the illusion of a full, disciplined U.S. Army Air Force fighter group on a combat patrol, annoyed by the sloppiness of a green wingman, not threatened by a squadron of zeros. The Japanese formation, which had been tightening for the kill, hesitated. Their smooth, predatory will lost its cohesion. The lead zero wobbled, its pilot undoubtedly wrestling with the calculus of the situation. Attacking a lone P-40 was one thing. Plunging into the center of what sounded like a prepared ambush by an unseen enemy was a quick way to decorate the jungle with the wreckage of the Emperor's finest. The moment hung in the balance, a spider silk thread over an abyss. Then, the lead zero rocked its wings once, a sharp command signal. And as one, the entire squadron banked away. They broke off their intercept, turning their noses toward the horizon, accelerating back into the vastness from which they came. They chose discretion, vanishing into the blue, unwilling to risk their planes and lives on the word of a calm, old man in a broken Warhawk. John Worthington watched them disappear, the knot in his stomach slowly loosening, replaced by a hollow, trembling awe. He was alone again. The sky was empty. His fictional squadron, Eagle Flight, had won its only battle without firing a single shot. He let out a long, shuddering breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The cockpit felt suddenly, overwhelmingly quiet. But he wasn't safe yet. He was deep in contested skies, in a failing plane, and his bluff had a shelf life. The Zero commander might report the location of a large enemy formation. Reinforcements could scramble. Or worse, he might realize he'd been tricked and come roaring back with a vengeance. Worthington shoved the throttle forward, wincing as the engine protested. He abandoned his planned route. He dropped the nose, not into a dive, but into a shallow descent, skimming lower, using the jagged terrain below as cover. He was no longer a ferry pilot. He was a fugitive, a ghost who had just talked his way out of the grave. The airstrip was still a lifetime away, and every shadow in the clouds behind him now held the shape of a returning zero. For the next hour, John Worthington flew not like a pilot, but like a shadow. He pressed the tired P-40 lower, until the smell of damp earth and rotting vegetation seemed to seep through the cockpit glass. The towering, emerald wall of the New Guinea jungle rushed beneath his wings, a blur of hostile green. He used every gully, every river bend, every tendril of cloud as cover, turning his aircraft into a fleeting stain against the landscape. His eyes were no longer on the compass or the map, but locked in a relentless scan. Rear mirror, left flank, right flank, the blind spot below his nose. The roar of his own engine was a traitorous noise, a beacon in the silence. Every beat of his heart felt like it echoed in the cockpit. Had they bought it? Or was the Zero leader, even now, circling back with a cold fury, radioing his coordinates to every gun on the coast? His mind replayed the bluff in frantic snapshots. The calm in his own voice surprised him. It was the voice he'd used 100 times over the intercom to assure passengers during turbulent transcontinental flights. "This is your captain. We're experiencing a bit of rough air. Please return to your seats." The same steady tone, repurposed to avert a different kind of disaster. It was a civilian skill that had just fought a military battle. The P-40's engine began running rough again, a metallic cough that shook the airframe. The oil temperature gauge was edging deeper into the red. This plane wasn't just a decoy, it was falling apart around him. Each sputter felt like a betrayal. He had outwitted the enemy, but could he outlast his own machine? Then, a new sound cut through the engine's grumble. A low, rhythmic droning growing from the north. Worthington's blood went cold. He craned his neck, searching the empty blue. Not Zeros. This was heavier, deeper. The outlines resolved. Twin tails, bulky fuselages. A formation of American B-25 Mitchell bombers, flanked by a handful of P-38 Lightnings, heading out on a raid. His own people. A wave of crushing isolation hit him, sharper than any fear of the Zeros. There they were, the real war machine, sleek and powerful and surrounded by friends. He was a ghost in a junker, skulking in the treetops. He could have radioed them, called for an escort, but a stubborn pride, or perhaps the chilling wisdom of his deception, kept his hand off the mic. What would he say? "This is a ferry pilot. I just lied to a squadron of Zeros, and I think they might be looking for me." He would sound unhinged, and his transmission might be the very thing that gave his position away. He watched the bomber stream past miles above him, a majestic armada untouched by his private, desperate war. They faded into the distance, leaving him more alone than ever. The coastline finally appeared on the horizon, a frayed brown line against the steel-gray sea. Home, or what passed for it. A dusty, pockmarked airstrip carved from the jungle. As he lined up for his final approach, the reality of what he had done settled on him with a physical weight. His hands, so steady during the bluff, began to tremble on the controls. The fear he had suppressed now flooded back, leaving him lightheaded. The wheels kissed the corrugated metal Marston matting with a jarring squeal and a cloud of dust. The P-40 shuddered, rolling out, its exhausted engine gasping into silence as he cut the switch. In the sudden, ringing quiet, John Worthington sat. He simply sat in the cockpit of the silent, beaten Warhawk, surrounded by the humid buzz of the jungle and the distant shouts of ground crew. He listened to the tink-tink-tink of the cooling engine. He looked at his weathered hands. He had delivered the plane, but how could he possibly deliver the report? For a full minute, John Worthington didn't move. The tropical heat, once held at bay by the cockpit slipstream, now invaded, heavy and suffocating. A young crew chief, his face smeared with grease, trotted up to the plane, a bored expression already forming. He saw a beat-up P-40 and an old pilot, just another ferry run completed. Then he saw Worthington's face. It wasn't the look of a man who'd completed a tedious milk run. It was the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had stepped to the edge of an abyss and leaned over. The crew chief's casual demeanor evaporated. "You all right, sir?" he called up, his voice laced with concern. Worthington unbuckled his harness with stiff, deliberate movements. His body felt 100 years old. He climbed down from the wing, his legs unsteady on solid ground. The debriefing officer, a harried captain in a sweat-stained shirt, met him outside the operations shack with a clipboard. "Worthington, any issues with the bird?" The word stuck in Worthington's throat. "How did you file a report on a battle that never happened, against enemies who never fired? How did you quantify a victory achieved with nothing but a lie and a calm voice?" "I encountered enemy aircraft," he began, his voice rough from disuse and tension. "A full squadron. Zeros." The debriefing officer's pen stopped. He looked up, his eyes sharpening. "Engaged?" "No." "Evaded?" "Not exactly." Worthington laid it out, piece by halting piece. The intercept. The formation. The bluff on the open channel. The fake coordinates for Eagle flight. The annoyed chastisement of a phantom wingman. As he spoke, the officer's expression cycled from skepticism to disbelief, and finally, to a dawning, incredulous awe. He called over the intelligence officer. Soon, a small, quiet crowd of ground personnel and off-duty pilots had gathered, listening to the old man's story. When he finished, there was a profound silence. Then, a young P-38 pilot, barely out of his teens, let out a low whistle. "You talked a whole squadron of Zeros out of a fight? Grandpa, that's the wildest kill I've ever heard of, and you didn't even fire a shot." The term "grandpa" hung in the air, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer a gentle dismissal. It held a new weight, a reverence for a different kind of courage, a cunning that came not from reflexes, but from a lifetime of calm under pressure. Intelligence cross-referenced his report. Later that day, radio intercepts from coast watchers and codebreakers would confirm it. A Japanese squadron leader had indeed reported aborting an attack on a large formation of American fighters in that sector, citing unfavorable odds. Worthington's Phantom Squadron had entered the official record of the enemy. That night, in the mess hall, the atmosphere around him was different. The hotshot fighter jocks didn't just nod. They offered him a seat. They asked, with genuine curiosity, how he'd kept his voice so steady. He was no longer a relic from a bygone era of aviation. He was the pilot who had fought a war of pure psychology and won. John Worthington had gone up as a deliverman in a cast-off plane. He came down as something else. He hadn't just ferried a P-40, he had delivered a lesson. In a war dominated by speed, firepower, and youthful daring, he had proven that experience itself was a weapon. That a cool head could be more devastating than a hot gun sight. That sometimes, the most powerful squadron is the one that exists only in the mind of a man brave enough to invent it, and in the fear of those who choose to believe. He had taken one last flight, not into combat, but into legend, and he had returned, not with a plane full of bullet holes, but with a story that would echo on that airstrip and far beyond for the rest of the war. A story that asked a single, powerful question: what is true strength in the chaos of war? This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to the War Archives as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.